Hi everyone, well done on making it all the way through to module 8. This module, we will be chatting through all things supplements and sport supplements and the evidence and recommendations for the most common ones that we see used in performance. So, coming up, we will be chatting through caffeine, creatine, protein, BCAAs, magnesium, bicarbonate, both pickle and beetroot juice, beta alanine, collagen, and then finally fat burners. So, really covering all the main supplements that we see used most commonly. In terms of caffeine, so the way that caffeine works is there's a compound called adenosine, which binds to receptors in the brain and creates that feeling of fatigue within our bodies. Now, what caffeine does is it competes with adenosine and binds to those same receptors. So it actually blocks that fatigue creating effect of adenosine because it can't get in there. Caffeine's got there first. So ultimately, this sees our feelings of alertness increase. In performance, caffeine will help to reduce our perception of effort during exercise and delay our feelings of fatigue as well. So ultimately, this means that we're able to perform at a higher intensity for a longer period of time. So caffeine kind of is one of those pretty low hanging fruit, quite easily accessible and safe supplements that we can use to enhance our performance. The evidence for the use of caffeine is strong, but of course, with everything, it depends on the individual. Some people don't tolerate caffeine well. Having large amounts of caffeine late in the day can impact on sleep, which we know can then have negative effects on recovery and performance. So keep those things in mind, but generally caffeine is really safe and a great supplement to use. This is just a nice little graphic on how our caffeine actually works. So as we can see here, we've got our receptors, which lead to our fatigue within the brain, but we can see that our little red caffeines are getting in there first and bumping our adenosines out the way. In terms of our dosage, we're looking at around 3 to 5 milligrams per kilo. So for sort of a typical, say, 70 kilo person, this could look like between 2 and 300 milligrams of caffeine around half an hour to 15 minutes before exercise. Moving on to creatine now. So creatine, or the use of creatine in our body, comes back to ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which we know is that compound and that energy source that our body needs for our anaerobic, short, sharp movements. So our body is using ATP for those repeated muscle contractions. ATP is bound to creatine phosphate, and when that bond breaks, that's when that energy source is released. Now, to keep regenerating ATP, to keep rebuilding that molecule, we need creatine as part of the mix. So the more creatine that we have in the muscle, the faster our body can regenerate ATP, which then, of course, leads to an increased ability to perform. Now, as all things with supplements, this isn't the be all and end all. If you're not nailing your nutrition, if you're not having adequate carbohydrates and protein to even begin with, where you guys come into it, if your client doesn't have an effective training program, adding creatine on top really isn't going to do that much. But if we're nailing all our basics and then we add in creatine, a lot of people will find that, we can just push that a little bit harder, go for a little bit longer, get those extra 2 or 3 reps out, and can just help with those training adaptations and that progression. So again, really strong evidence for the use of creatine. We're looking at around 3 to 5 grams per day. Whether you go straight into that sort of maintenance dose or choose to do a loading phase is up to the individual, but usually just that general kind of 1 scoop a day is adequate. This again is just a little summary of our kind of supplements and the evidence available for those supplements. As you can see, our creatine really comes out on top. There's been a lot of research into it, a lot of trials and studies done. We're seeing evidence in brain health, concussion prevention, evidence in kind of those more endurance sports as well. So running, cycling, things like that too. And then, of course, where it all began, our sort of powerlifting and more anaerobic type movement. So creatine really is fantastic. If you go back to the slides as well and click here, it's a really interesting journal article to read, which summarizes the evidence on creatine really well as well. In terms of our protein powders now, so generally, I think we all know our most common protein powder is our whey protein. Our whey protein is dairy-based. It has a high biological value. So what I mean by that is the biological value of a protein is the percentage or the amount of that protein that our body can actually use effectively. So when it comes to whey or animal-based proteins, we usually see that our body can effectively utilize around 80 to 90% of that protein. It's easily digested, it's really accessible, and it can really help with our kind of muscle and training adaptations. So whey is kind of the first option that I will direct a lot of people to. And we see it in either our whey protein concentrate or isolate. It doesn't really matter too much. Your whey isolate is probably your most standard protein powder that you're going to see. So it's going to be more affordable and is the one that most people will go for. In terms of our casein proteins, so we often see casein being promoted as a slow release protein. So again, it's another dairy-based protein, but the type of protein is different. So casein will actually kind of clot or curdle when it hits the stomach acid. And this then slows down the digestion and slows down the release of that protein out into our body for use. So ultimately, I guess at the end of the day, the evidence is mixed, and overall it's lacking in showing casein as being more superior to other protein sources for overnight and for sort of promoting muscle maintenance and recovery overnight. So ultimately, it's up to you. It's up to kind of your clients and what they prefer. The easiest thing to do is to direct people to just your standard whey protein, which can be utilized, kind of at all times in our performance. So whether it's post-exercise or for that pre-sleep overnight recovery kind of protein dose as well. Our plant-based proteins now, so we usually see with our plant-based powders either soy protein or soy isolate, or we'll see a blend of rice, pea, or some sort of other, almond or plant blend. Things to look out for is our soy protein has a very similar biological value to our dairy protein, and it is often cheaper as well. So if you have someone who doesn't respond well to whey protein, or you have a vegan or vegetarian athlete who's looking for a plant-based protein powder, I would be recommending soy rather than a sort of plant or some other sort of blend of protein. In terms of our blends, our other plant proteins often have quite a poor biological value. And depending on the blend or depending on the plant that the protein has been extracted from, sometimes we're missing key amino acids there as well. So that's why you won't often see just rice protein on its own. You'll see it mixed with 2 or 3 other protein types, because plant proteins, we know they aren't complete proteins. They don't have a full amino acid profile. So we do have to mix 2 or 3 together to make sure that it has all 9 of those essential amino acids in there. Now, in terms of our leucine, so we know that 2 to 3 grams of leucine will help to maximize muscle protein synthesis. And a lot of the time, that is why people will reach for a protein powder. But we do know that rather than supplementation, we can find leucine in our food as well, mostly in our kind of animal-based protein products. So we can still take that food first approach when it comes to both protein and hitting those leucine targets, rather than requiring supplements all the time. In terms of our BCAAs, so our branched chain amino acids, typically this is a powder containing 3 of our 9 essential amino acids. So we'll see leucine, isoleucine, and valine as well. So studies have shown that BCAAs may play a role in the reduction of delayed onset muscle soreness, and help to, I guess, start that muscle building and that muscle recovery. But our studies that are looking at BCAAs are comparing BCAA ingestion with either a placebo, so sort of just a fake glucose or just straight protein powder, or no protein at all, which of course, if we're not having any protein, yes, there's definitely going to be negative effects and we're going to see poorer recovery. So BCAAs are going to seem like they're doing something, but if we compare BCAAs to a good high quality protein source in the correct dose that has all 9 amino acids, we're not going to need our BCAAs. So this is probably one of my favorite memes. Guy taking BCAAs while eating 200 grams of protein a day. It really isn't going to make a difference. It's pretty much a waste of money. You're better off focusing on your overall protein intake, and again, using that food first approach rather than sipping on BCAAs during your workouts. So as I said, what we're doing instead, we're focusing on 20 to 30 grams of protein at each meal. Yes, we know that leucine is really important for stimulating our muscle protein synthesis, but as with most of our supplements, individual nutrients are used by the body more efficiently and more effectively when they're digested from a complete or whole food rather than just in isolation form. So we're better off to focus on leucine-rich protein sources like our animal proteins after a workout, and aiming for around 2 to 3 grams per day spread throughout the day, which you'll usually find that if you're having at least 30 grams of a good quality source of protein at each meal, you'll also be hitting those leucine targets, which are then going to help that constant stimulation of muscle protein synthesis. Moving on to collagen now. So I think collagen is one of these things that is quite up and coming. We're starting to see more research in the area, and there is some exciting stuff coming out around collagen. But at the moment, what we know is collagen is a protein. It's found in our skin, our ligaments, and also our tendons. So we'll often see, or what we previously saw was collagen targeted at usually women for anti-aging or as an anti-aging strategy. This is because we know that collagen formation in the body does start to decline as we get older. We lose that kind of elasticity in the skin. We start seeing wrinkles and things like that. But it's the same kind of thing happening in our ligaments and tendons as well. So as our collagen production drops off, our ligaments and things aren't quite as stretchy. They don't bounce back as well, and they don't have as much of that flexibility in them. Now, in terms of performance, we know that collagen may help to speed up recovery from a connective tissue injury, so like a ligament tear. And there is a bit of research coming out around whether it could also play a role in prevention of those injuries to begin with. At the moment, we're kind of playing around with doses at around that 15 to 20 gram mark before exercise, but collagen is definitely a bit of a watch this space kind of nutrient. In terms of magnesium, so magnesium is a very common supplement that I think a lot of people often take, whether it's to help with sleep or cramps or kind of muscle soreness. So magnesium is obviously naturally found in a lot of foods, and it is used in our body. It's really important for muscle and nerve function, and that includes heart function as well. So obviously our heart is just one big muscle, and our levels of magnesium in the body are really important to make sure that our hearts are functioning well. This in turn means magnesium plays a role in blood pressure control and also bone development as well, working with our other nutrients like calcium and vitamin D. So our current evidence is suggesting that supplementation of magnesium really does have little benefit, especially when our dietary intake is adequate. So again, I know I say it a lot, but we're really focusing on our food first approach, trying to increase magnesium rich foods in our diet, whereby the magnesium will be absorbed and used better by our body than if we were just to band-aid a poor diet with supplements and hope that that will just fix everything. During magnesium deficiency, poor sleep is often seen, which is why when people are struggling to fall asleep at night, they will sometimes turn to magnesium to support their sleep. I think it's important to have a look at our overall picture. When did we last drink caffeine? Are we having, Coke or tea or dark chocolate close to bed, which are all caffeine containing foods? Are we on screens and, watching TV really close to bed, or working or on our phones, things like that? Or are we also exercising quite late in the evening and then having a big meal and struggling to fall asleep after that? So again, we need to look at our lifestyle and our whole diet and see where that poor sleep may be coming from, because most of the time it's probably not from a magnesium deficiency. By the same token, if taking a bit of magnesium helps, whether it's a placebo or not, that's great. There's not going to be any harm done. But if there's other issues at play, it's obviously important to address those first. So there is some evidence to say that the quality of sleep or the length of sleep may be assisted by magnesium. But we don't really have any evidence that point towards magnesium as a treatment for cramps. There's a little bit of research around cramps in pregnant women, which is quite niche, but magnesium can help there. And sometimes magnesium can help with that kind of like restless leg syndrome. But yeah, pretty mixed studies at the moment. The other thing we need to consider as well is that depending on the type of magnesium that we're having, often magnesium will cause gastrointestinal upset. So we can see loose bowels and things like that. And at times we will actually use magnesium as a form of laxative or during the treatment of constipation. So just something to be aware of as well. If you have athletes that are struggling with GI upset but taking high doses of magnesium, that's something to think about. In terms of bicarbonate, so this is another one of our kind of sport-specific supplements. So when we talk about bicarbonate, we are literally talking about bicarb soda. So what does this actually do? So this nice little diagram gives you a good summary, but pretty much an increase in bicarbonate in our blood can help to neutralize lactate or lactic acid that builds up in the muscles during exercise, which we know is kind of a byproduct or a waste product of our energy systems and our energy production. So we're looking at around 200 to 300 milligrams per kilo between 1 to 3 hours before exercise. And we're mostly utilizing bicarb in longer events, more of those aerobic events, running, swimming, things like that. One thing that we need to know is having this amount of bicarb soda is, one, pretty disgusting. You wouldn't usually sit down and drink a drink with bicarb soda in it. You'd use a teaspoon or two if you were, baking a cake or something like that. So a lot of the time it can be quite hard to ingest this amount of bicarb, and we can see some pretty significant stomach upset and gastrointestinal problems alongside it as well. So what we're wanting to do is, if we're wanting to use bicarb as a supplement, we want to be increasing it slowly and making sure that we're training our body to process the bicarb. Can help to delay fatigue, but overall there is mixed evidence around its use. And as I said, we really need to trial it and train our body to be able to utilize the bicarb. This isn't something you would do the morning of your event for the first time, that is. In terms of our juices now, so our first one is pickle juice. So you might have seen a lot of, especially AFL players, if they're on the bench, a lot of the time they're drinking these little bottles of pickle juice, or if not drinking, at least doing a mouth rinse and then spitting it out. So pickle juice can help to prevent muscle cramps. It acts on the kind of nerve endings in the back of our throat, which sends signals down our kind of whole spinal cord and all those nerve receptor channels. It helps to kind of switch off the cramping. So it's the acid in the juice that is stimulating those neurons or those nerve endings, and stopping that muscle cramping. So this kind of little flow chart gives you a good summary of how that mechanism is actually working, and what can cause those cramps in the first place as well. which a lot of the time we see cramping with dehydration, whether that be from just not drinking enough or not consuming hydrating solutions. So sometimes just plain water isn't enough. And the other thing too is a lot of the time in really hot, humid environments where our sweat rate is significantly increased, a lot of the time we're not matching our fluid intake to that increase. And that's when we're seeing that cramping happening as well. In terms of our dosage, we're looking at 1 ml per kilogram of body weight. And as I said, we need to be using this in conjunction with good nutrition, first and foremost. So if we're underfueling, if we don't have enough carbohydrate or energy present, our muscles aren't going to perform very well. If we're dehydrated as well, we'll often see those cramps. So it's one of those things that if we're cramping, pickle juice is not going to solve all our problems. We need to step back and go right back to the start and look at our overall nutrition, making sure we're getting enough carbs first and foremost. In terms of our beetroot juice, so beetroot juice or kind of nitrate supplementation is something that can be beneficial in performance. So the theory is that beetroots or the nitrates within beetroots are vasodilating. So they are increasing the size of our blood vessels, which can help to lower our blood pressure and enhance our blood flow to the heart and muscles. So if our blood is able to travel more easily and more freely around the body, this can lead to an improvement in cardiorespiratory function. So a higher delivery rate of oxygen around the body to the muscles, which we know oxygen is key when it comes to generating our energy and being involved in all those metabolic pathways as well. So it's thought to reduce the overall energy cost of exercise or make our energy production and the way that our body's actually functioning more efficient ultimately. In terms of our dosage, we're looking at 350 to 600 milligrams of nitrate, which equates to around half a litre of beetroot juice, which is quite a lot. We need this at least 2 to 3 hours prior to exercise. And we know that mouthwash and toothpaste, that cleaning our teeth, can actually inhibit the use of these nitrates and the effect on the body. So it is a very specific protocol, and it's probably not something that I would just be recommending sort of on a day-to-day basis to every athlete, but there is a bit of evidence here, and in certain situations, it's a pretty cool supplement that we can have in our toolkit. Beta-alanine now. So beta-alanine is another one of those pretty typical common supplements. We see it a lot in mixed supplements, so especially in our pre-workouts and things, we'll often see beta-alanine as an ingredient. So what this compound does is helps to increase carnosine in the muscles, which, similar to our bicarbonate, it helps to buffer that acid buildup, that lactic acid during exercise, which ultimately can help to delay or prevent fatigue. We do have some pretty good evidence around beta-alanine, and the dosage is obviously a bit easier. It's a lot smaller than having half a litre of a bicarb drink. So similar to creatine, we'll often do a loading and then a maintenance phase. So our loading phase usually lasts for between 4 to 8 weeks. And then our maintenance phase is a daily 1.2 gram dose ongoing. Something to note with beta-alanine is it can often cause that kind of tingling or itching feeling within the body. So that's something to, I guess, warn people about or be mindful of, that this is not a supplement that will work for everyone. As I mentioned, our pre-workout, which is often contains our beta-alanine, but there is usually also quite a high dose of caffeine in there, and then a mix of creatine, citrulline, beta-alanine, and usually a whole long list of just other pretty random ingredients as well. In terms of our pros and cons, there's no specific dosing in our pre-workout. So what I mean by that is, yes, it will come with a scoop and it'll tell you to have 1 scoop or whatever it might say on the packet. But it's likely that it's not giving you the correct dose for your body weight of all those compounds in it. So it'll either be providing too much or too little caffeine. It's usually underdosing our creatine and our beta-alanine. So it's usually not actually an effective supplement, and we're better off instead taking those main ingredients and having them individually in their correct dosage. That's where we'll see results, rather than just having a scoop of pre-workout. The other thing to note is that some of the ingredients in there are actually better consumed post rather than pre-workout. So creatine, we will often see more benefits from after a workout. It doesn't matter too much, but if we're getting an incorrect dose and incorrect timing in our pre-workout, really we're wasting our money on that pre-workout, and we should just be buying creatine on its own and dosing it properly. So if you took some of these old school kind of jacked pre-workouts and felt like you were absolutely invincible, sometimes we're seeing now, ongoing blood pressure issues and things like that, because a lot of these pre-workouts are unregulated. The caffeine content in them is absolutely through the roof. And long term, they're not a sustainable or a safe supplement to be having. In terms of the pros of a pre-workout, the ingredients in there, in theory, are good. And most of those ingredients will have performance benefits. It is usually quite a cheap, easy, and specific dose of caffeine. So at least with a pre-workout, you can dose the caffeine to the exact amount that your body needs. But again, we can do this in other ways with no-dose tablets or coffee as well. So I would really recommend avoiding a pre-workout and instead doing individual supplementation. Our fat burners are along the same lines. Fat burners really grind my gears, but ultimately they're working on the principle of thermogenesis. So fat burners are claiming to have ingredients that increase our body temperature. And with that increase in body temperature, we're burning more energy, more calories, and ultimately burning fat. We often see, again, just a lot of caffeine in there, sometimes carnitine, and there's often things like green tea extract, paprika, chili, things like that are thermogenic, or they're sort of increasing our body temperature and claiming to boost our metabolism. There's really no evidence. I wouldn't recommend it. Again, they're usually super expensive, and you're actually better off just having caffeine in the correct dose for you, some creatine, and maybe a bit of beta-alanine as well. Of course, in addition to your carbohydrates and your proper timing around your workouts and everything. So as you can see, they're better off in the bin. Chuck them out. This brings us to the end. So a quick summary, our sports supplements should really be administered under dietetic guidance. So If you have people that you're prescribing programs for, if you have athletes that are training really well, but they're just feeling like they need to go that extra step, feel free to pop in a referral, refer on, message a dietitian, have a chat, and build that relationship and build that connection with those healthcare professionals so that you can get the best outcomes for your clients. The strongest evidence for our performance supplements are lying with caffeine, creatine, bicarbonate, beta-alanine, and nitrates. They are kind of our top 5, but within that, I would really be focusing on those first 2, your caffeine and your creatine, first and foremost. That's not to say that in, 5 or 10 years, nutrition is still a very emerging field, especially the field of sports nutrition, as we see more women's sport and more research in that area as well. We may have better evidence in the future. We may see new supplements coming onto the market. So it does pay to keep on top of that, keep in touch with, your dietitians as well, and just make sure that your athletes are getting the best advice. Consider the risks, consider placebo effects of supplements. And if you're working with elite athletes, consider the need for supplements to be regulated and tested as well to make sure that there's no banned products in there too. And sort of our last thing to note is that any diagnosed micronutrient deficiencies, so things like, say, an iron deficiency, should be medically managed, so managed under the guidance of a GP or potentially a dietitian as well. That wraps things up for our nutrition course. So I hope you've all learned something, taken something away from this. Feel free to shoot me an email or a message if you have questions or if there's things that you wanted to chat about. Otherwise, all the best. Enjoy getting out there and working with your athletes. And yeah, well done. Thanks, guys.